Morning, all. All right, so we're going to look at the 1981-82 season, and this concludes me pre-recording these for my vacation. So this is the last one I'm pre-recording. I guess I pre-record all my videos. You guys know what I mean. So we have 21 teams still, but the NHL fixes things. They switch up the divisions, which is the right move. These are the divisions that we all became familiar with during the 80s. The one difference being that the Colorado Rockies are here. They're going to end up over here. And that's going to mean some movement in which teams are in which division a little bit for 82-83. But for 81-82, the divisional playoffs also replace 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15. Networks like to have rivalries to promote, and you're not going to have rivalries 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, etc. And the NHL I think they prefer that system. So there's 8 games each that you will play against your divisional rivals and 3 games each against the rest of the league. So it works out pretty darn well, and it means that if you play well within your division, you have an excellent chance of making the playoffs. The Islanders win a record of 15 in a row from January 21st through February 20th. That record would be beaten about a decade later by the Pittsburgh Penguins. Gretzky hits a record with 50 goals in 39 games, and this was the season after Mike Bossy got 50 and 50. He also had 212 points, which sets a record. He is the only player to pass 200 points in a season, even until now. Lemieux got to 199, so it was close. And Gretzky's 92 goals, a record that stands till this day. I don't think anybody ever threatens it. So the Jets improved by 48 points. They had a 32-point season in 80-81, and they improved to a 500 team the following season. A lot of that has to do with the addition of Dale Hawerchuk, their number 1 draft pick the previous year. The Flyers come out with something fashionable, the Cooperalls, which made players faster, but when players fell down, they tended to slide into the boards a little bit harder than they otherwise would have because there's no friction. So if you fall down, you're just going to keep going. So the Flyers are the first team to wear them. The Hartford Whalers would most famously wear them, but yeah, the Flyers had them first. And yes, they looked weird. The miracle on Manchester would occur this season. The Kings were down 5-0 against the Oilers going into the third period, and they came back and won it in a series that was absolutely wild. I think the Oilers learned a lot from that series, but defensively they were a disaster in that one. So December 2nd of 1981, a huge trade takes place. The Sabres trade Danny Gare, Jim Schoenfeld, and Derek Smith to Detroit for Mike Foligno, Dale McCourt, and Brent Peterson. Absolutely huge trade when it took place, and it was probably the first big trade that I thought was really cool. That I was like, that's great, those big names going from one team to the other. November 25th of 1981, the Flames trade Bob McMillan and Don Lever to the Colorado Rockies for Lanny McDonald. So they get Lanny out of Colorado, which is good because, the Rockies aren't going anywhere except New Jersey. April 7th of 1982, the Kings and the Oilers set a playoff record with 18 goals in a 10-8 win by the Kings over the Oilers. So there's the 5-goal comeback, and there's a 10-8 game as well. Yeah, defense wasn't really a thing. October 10th of 1981, Borje Salming becomes the first European-trained player to reach 500 career points in the National Hockey League. February 15th of 1982, Tony Esposito sets a record with his 13th straight season, playing 40 games in the net. So the standings go as such. The Montreal Canadiens finished first in what is now the Adams division, 109 points, record of 46, 17, and 17. They're coached by Bob Berry. 360 goals scored, 223 goals against. The Boston Bruins finished second with 96 points, a record of 43, 27, and 10. 323 goals scored, 285 goals against. They're coached by Jerry Cheevers at that point. The Buffalo Sabres, coached by Jimmy Roberts, finished 39, 26, and 15, 93 points, 307 goals scored, 273 goals against. The Quebec Nordiques go above 500 with a record of 33, 31, and 16, 82 points, 356 goals scored, 345 goals against, and Michel Bergeron, Petit Tigre, right? Yeah, he's the coach there in Quebec. Hartford, 21, 41, and 18 for 60 points. Rough season for them under coach Larry Plow. 264 goals scored, 351 goals against. The Patrick division is led by the New York Islanders, who are having a pretty good start to the 80s, right? 118 points, 54, 16, and 10 record, 385 goals scored, 250 goals against. They're coached by Al Arbor. The New York Rangers, 39, 27, and 14, 92 points, 316 goals scored, 306 goals against. They're coached by Herb Brooks at this point in time. The Philadelphia Flyers finished 38, 31, and 11 for 87 points, 325 goals scored, 313 goals against. There was a coaching change that year. Pat Quinn went 34, 29, and 9 prior to that change. Bob McCammon goes 4, 2, and 2 after that. The Pittsburgh Penguins finished 31, 36, and 13, 75 points for them, 310 goals scored, 337 goals against. Eddie Johnston is the coach in Pittsburgh. The Washington Capitals continue to struggle, but this is the last year where that's the case. A big trade would help turn things around for them after that. They finished 26, 41, and 13, 65 points, 319 goals scored, 338 goals against. Danny Belial is the coach in Washington at the time. The Norris division, which has 6 teams, and it throws me off a little bit that it does. In fact, I really did a double take putting this board together. Minnesota, I was like, wait, which team is here that shouldn't be, and what? The Norris doesn't have 6 teams. But Glenn Sonmore, the coach in Minnesota, the team goes 37, 23, and 20 for 94 points, 346 goals scored, 288 goals against. And despite going all the way to the final in 81 and getting people's expectations pretty high, Minnesota, after a good regular season, just can't quite get over the hump in the postseason. The Winnipeg Jets, as mentioned before, they improved to 80 points with a record of 33, 33, and 14. 319 goals scored, 332 goals against. They're coached by Tom Watt. I did mention Glenn Sonmore as the coach of Minnesota, right? Sure I did. St. Louis, 32, 40, and 8. The record for them, 72 points. 315 goals scored, 349 goals against. Red Berenson goes 28, 34, and 6. And then Emile Francis comes in and goes 4, 6, and 2. Chicago Blackhawks, who also had 2 coaches that year, 30, 38, and 12 record for 72 points, 332 goals scored, 363 goals against. The goals against are absolutely ridiculous, right? 363. Like, if a team had 363 goals against now, yeah. Keith Magnuson had a record of 18, 24, and 10. Bob Pulford stepped behind the bench, went 12, 14, and 2. The Toronto Maple Leafs, in the midst of what would become a very bad decade, 20, 44, and 16 record, at least in the regular season. When they made the postseason, they were pretty good. With 56 points, 298 goals scored, 380 goals against. Mike Nikolic is the coach in Toronto. The Detroit Red Wings, 21, 47, and 12 at the bottom of the Norris division, 54 points, 270 goals scored, 351 goals against. Wayne Mexner is the coach in Detroit that year. Pretty hapless season for Detroit. The Detroit dead things phrase is getting thrown around a bit at that point. The Smythe division is won by the Oilers after a pretty strong run in 81 and showing what they could do against Montreal and then the Islanders. They go 48, 17, and 15 under coach Glenn Sather, 111 points, 417 goals scored, 295 goals against. That's ridiculous. The Vancouver Canucks go 30, 33, and 17, 77 points. 290 goals scored, 286 goals against. They were a good team during the regular season, just not above 500. Harry Neal went 26, 33, and 16, and then Roger Nielsen in relief, 4-0 and 1. The Canucks entered the playoffs on a pretty good run and then carried that through the playoffs. The Calgary Flames go 29, 34, and 17 to finish with 75 points. 334 goals scored, 345 goals against under coach Al McNeil. The LA Kings, 24, 41, and 15 record, 63 points, 314 goals, 369 goals against. They're coached by Parker McDonald. A lot of max here. The Colorado Avalanche are not in the league yet. The Colorado Rockies finish 18, 49, and 13. This is the last time this magnet will be on the board for the Rockies. 49 points, 241 goals scored, 362 goals against, and they're coached by Bill McMillan. Like I said, there's a lot of Max. McMillan, McDonald, McNeil. There's a Neil there too. So anyways, all right. The Art Ross Trophy that year goes to Wayne Gretzky, the Edmonton Oilers, by a lot. The Masterton goes to Glenn Resch of the Colorado Avalanche. Or I said Avalanche again, Rockies. The Calder, and again, I haven't made that mistake throughout this series, and here I am making it now. The Calder Trophy goes to Dale Hawerchuk of the Winnipeg Jets. The Conn Smythe goes to Mike Bossy of the New York Islanders. The Selke does not go to Bob Gainey. It goes to Steve Kasper of the Boston Bruins. The Hart Trophy goes to Wayne Gretzky of the Edmonton Oilers. The Jack Adams goes to Tom Watt of the Winnipeg Jets. The Norris goes to Doug Wilson of the Chicago Blackhawks. The Lady Byng goes to Rick Middleton of the Boston Bruins. The Lester Pearson Award goes to Wayne Gretzky of the Edmonton Oilers. The Jennings goes to the combination of Walmsley and Heron for the Montreal Canadiens. And the Vezina goes to Billy Smith. Now that we're voting on the Vezina, and the Jennings Trophy is for goals against, which is what the Vezina was for before that season. So the All-Stars, your first team All-Star down the middle is Wayne Gretzky of the Oilers. Brian Trottier of the Islanders, second team. On the right side, Mike Bossy of the New York Islanders is first team. Rick Middleton of the Boston Bruins is second team. On the left side, Mark Messier of the Edmonton Oilers. He started out as a left winger. He's your first team. Second team is John Tonelli of the New York Islanders. On the blue line, Doug Wilson of the Chicago Blackhawks, first team alongside Ray Bourque of the Boston Bruins. Paul Coffey in Edmonton, second team All-Star, alongside Brian Engblom of the Washington Capitals. In net, Billy Smith of the New York Islanders is first team, and Grant Fuhr of the Edmonton Oilers is your second team All-Star. So your leading scorers, Wayne Gretzky of the Oilers, 80 games, 92 goals, 120 assists, 212 points. And whenever people say, well, Gretzky scored all those points, but, it was a lot easier. Nobody else scored points like that. Mike Bossy, second, 80 games, 64 goals, 83 assists, 147 points, which any other season would have easily been likely the winner in the scoring race, but not that year. Peter Stastny for Quebec, 80 games, 46 goals, 93 assists, 139 points. Dennis Maruk in Washington, 80 games, 60 goals, 76 assists for 136 points. Brian Trottier in New York, 80 games, 50 goals, 79 assists, 129 points. And by New York, of course, you mean Islanders. Denny Savard in Chicago, 80 games, 32 goals, 87 assists, 119 points. Marcel Dion in LA, 78 games, 50 goals, 67 assists for 117 points. And Bobby Smith in Minnesota, 80 games, 43 goals, 71 assists, 114 points. Ridiculous amount of 100-point scorers that year in the NHL. Billy Smith leads goaltenders and wins for the New York Islanders. Record of 32-9-4, 2.97 goals against. No shutouts. None. And he's the first team All-Star, showing that shutouts just aren't a thing in the NHL at that point. Grant Fuhr for the Oilers goes 28-5-14, 3.31 goals against. Also no shutouts. Mike Liut in St. Louis, 28-28-7, 4.07 goals against. Two shutouts. Dan Bouchard in Quebec, 27-22-11, 3.87 goals against average, one shutout. Don Edwards in Buffalo, 26-23-9 record, 3.52 goals against, no shutouts. And Joe Meloche in Minnesota goes 26-15-9, 3.48 goals against average, and one shutout. Which brings us to the playoffs, and we go from having a preliminary round to a division semifinal. It's still just best of 5. It would become a best of 7 about 5 years later. Vancouver sweeps Calgary in the first round, so 3 straight. LA beats Edmonton in that crazy series, 3-2. The New York Rangers knock off Philly, 3-1. The New York Islanders eventually beat Pittsburgh, but it took the full 5 games. The St. Louis Blues beat Winnipeg, 3-1. The Chicago Blackhawks beat Minnesota, 3-1. Boston beats Buffalo, 3-1. And Quebec beats Montreal in a wild 5-game series, takes all 5. The division finals then, Vancouver beats LA 4-1. The New York Islanders beat the Rangers in 6. The Islanders-Rangers meeting a lot during this era, and again, that's where a lot of that rivalry comes from, or at least gets started. Chicago and St. Louis meet, and Chicago beats St. Louis in 6. That's a rivalry that's gone on for some time now. Quebec beats Boston. It takes the full 7 games. As I remember, that was a really fun series to watch. The conference finals then, it is Vancouver against Chicago. One benefit Vancouver had in this run, they play Calgary, LA, and Chicago. None of these teams had a better record than Vancouver. They are fortunate, I think, that the Oilers and the North Stars got knocked out, It doesn't take anything away from what the Canucks did going all the way to the final, but to me it's noteworthy. So Vancouver goes into Chicago and wins game 1 2-1. Then Chicago wins 4-1 in game 2. Vancouver wins both games at home, and that's of course the game where Chicago wins. That's where Roger Nielsen puts the towel on his hockey stick and puts it up in mock surrender. And when the Canucks came back, there were a bunch of Canuck fans waving white towels. The white towel is a mocking of surrender. And now it's just everywhere, and people just see them as rally towels. But yeah, Vancouver wins both games at home after that incident by scores of 4-3 and 5-2, and then they win in Chicago 6-2. And the city of Vancouver was quite excited. The Canucks were going to the Stanley Cup final. Quebec and the Islanders. This series doesn't last very long. The Islanders win 4-1 and 5-2, and then they go to Quebec and they win 5-4 and 4-2. They win that series in 4 straight, and they're just warming up. So the Vancouver Canucks held the lead in game 1 on Long Island, but Mike Bossy would tie the game and win it in overtime. So game 1's a 6-5 overtime win for the Islanders. They win the second game 6-4, and then they go to Vancouver and play very well defensively to close it out by scores of 3-0 and 3-1. So they did not give Vancouver any daylight. Once game 1 was done, you kind of felt like this is going to go to the Islanders, isn't it? But at any rate, it was a pretty entertaining final to watch. Potvin scores 2 goals, 7 assists in that Stanley Cup final. Mike Bossy, 7 goals and 1 assist. Trottier, goal and 6 assists. Stefan Persson, 5 assists for him. And Clark Gillies had 2 goals and an assist. Billy Smith had a .911 save percentage. On the Vancouver side, Thomas Gradin had 3 goals and 2 assists. Lars Molin had 4 assists. So the whole Swedish Vancouver thing, that goes back to this era. Jerry Minor had a goal and 2 assists. Tiger Williams had 3 assists in the final. And Kurt Fraser had 3 assists. Vancouver had no shortage of truculence during this era. Richard Brodeur goes with an .870 save percentage in the final. He really is a huge part of the reason Vancouver does get to the final, and King Richard became his nickname going forward. But this was the final season for Colorado. As you can see, they didn't have a good team, they didn't have a great building, and they didn't have great management. So they would try again, and they'd be more successful with the relocated Quebec Nordiques a little over a decade later. We'll get there, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.